Okay, music is playing.
The red flag flying here.
Hello and welcome to Socialist Night Live. We are live and it is really nice to see you. So tonight, sometimes I have been known in the past to play a bit of a Philomena Kunk role and pretend I don't know what's going on. Tonight, that will not be a role. That will be a genuine position I have, because I really don't know that much about French politics. I know a little bit, but really I don't really know what the system is. I don't know the importance of it. So tonight we're going to be going through that together, and if you've got any questions in the chat, please do ask them, because we have got some people who do know about French politics, who do have an opinion on this and do know the importance of this for the left in the UK and around the world. We also have international listeners as well, so we have like people from South America who listen, we have people from all over Europe who listen, so this could be their chance to laugh at my ignorance about this topic, whilst also going, wow, there are some people who pay attention to what's going on in other countries. Firstly, I am going to introduce you to someone that you may have seen on the show before, may have heard on the show before, and that is Harry Cross. How are you doing, Harry?
Hello, Paul. I'm very well, thanks. Thanks for having me again.
You're always welcome here. And also, we've got Stanley. Stanley, how are you doing?
Very well, thank you. Thanks for having me on the show tonight.
Oh, thank you for coming on. It's a pleasure to have you. So what we're going to do now is let's find out what your position is, why you care about French politics so much. We'll start with you, Stanley, because we've not really heard from you before. So, yeah, what's your connection to France, French politics? Why are you so interested in this particular topic area?
Well, I'll start with my French connection. Um, so I arrived here 5 years ago as an Erasmus student, and so I studied at Sciences Po Toulouse, and so we studied a bit of French politics and we did a lot of comparative politics. And then learning French, because I arrived in France being an A0 learner, and then it sparked my interest in language and politics, and so then it also naturally sparked my interest in French politics. And so here I am today, back in France, living here, and potentially having to face not just Brexit, but now Frexit.
Yeah. Okay. So Frexit, that could be a thing, yeah?
Yeah, it was a major policy of the far right candidate Marie Le Pen, and uh, I wouldn't be surprised if that was still her major policy push if she becomes president.
Okay, well, I'm sure we'll learn a little bit about that later on when we get into the details of what the policies are of the presidential candidates. Harry, what's your background with France?
So, I'm a French speaker, Paul, and I've been following French politics for more than 10 years now, including the three presidential runs of Jean-Luc Mélenchon, the left's near miss in the election that just happened. In that time, I've been following French politics, both to keep up my French, but also because I think it's interesting and useful to compare politics in different countries. So, as I was a member of the Labour Party in the UK, I'd compare what was happening in the Labour Party and with Jeremy Corbyn compared to what was happening in France with Jean-Luc Mélenchon and the people behind both of them. I lived in France very briefly from 2013 to 2014 as a student, and I was a party member at that time in the left front that backed Jean-Luc Mélenchon. So I've still got friends across the channel in France, and I can see on social media how things are going there.
Okay, so far more interested in the topic. Both of you have far more information than I do, so I'm looking forward to learning something tonight. We've had a question in from Mia. She's saying, a what role? I'm talking about Philomena Kunk, who on the Philomena Kunk was a character played. What was the thing? It was on a political program where
Charlie Brooker.
yeah, on Charlie Brooker, where like basically she was just an idiot, and it was quite useful because she would play the idiot character, and in the past I've kind of played down my knowledge of a topic in order to bring on the conversation, but this time I really am an idiot when it comes to this. So that is the position we're in. Okay, so let's start
Danny
off.
and I are the opposite. We're idiots who are going to play up our knowledge for the purpose of the podcast. Speaking for myself, at least.
Sorry, I missed that. Then I had some audio problems.
Oh, sorry. No, I was just talking about my lack of knowledge of things. So we're going to move into what's going on. So why is French politics important to us in the UK and more specifically on the left? We'll start with Stanley again.
Well, something. Well, obviously, France is our closest neighbour, other than Ireland, and we've always had a very frenemy relationship with France, and I think we have a lot of love and hate in that relationship. And so, I think it's whatever happens in France will directly affect our national conversation, and particularly around the Part du Calais, the area around Calais, and the policy questions around immigration and the status of the jungle. But also something that I always found interesting about French left politics is how much, sorry to insult my English colleagues, but like how much more alive French politics seems on the left. Well, at least how much more vocal they are in the streets. And so I think French politics is very much how we might have been in the 70s and 60s.
So, like, you've mentioned a couple of interesting things there. Obviously, there's the Calais jungle, as a lot of people call it, which is a big topic in the UK because we've got Priti Patel posturing and talking about like what she plans to do and gunboats and all sorts of things. Do you hear much of that in France? Because you're living in France at the moment, aren't you? Do you hear much of that kind of rhetoric coming over, or do you kind of ignore that and think, well, she's just just saying things, or she's an idiot, or whatever? Is that a part of the national conversation there?
Um, well, I'll start with Brexit. Really, the French feel very upset and rejected by us over Brexit, and so anything that we sort of espouse around Brexit and immigration, they feel they've done their part. It was our choice to leave, and we have chosen to leave the debate. And again, it sort of ties into this rejection of their feelings of rejection from us choosing to leave the European community. And so I think sometimes, not every French person, but some French people, they feel a bit shocked by some of the things that are coming out of the national press and sometimes our national politicians in the UK.
It is pretty shocking when they're talking about like sending gunboats for people on makeshift rafts. To be honest, like probably a relatively sensible thing to be shocked by the bizarre nature of our political debate at the moment in the UK. Harry, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure Stan will also agree we shouldn't idolize the political debate in France. The far right is pretty ugly, and I guess we'll discuss the far right later on. But what's been worrying over the past 5 years and beyond has been how much of the anti-migrant and in France, I guess specifically an anti-Muslim rhetoric has bled through into the discourse of centrist and centre-left politicians and centre-right. Again, much as it has this side of the border. So they're playing to different audiences, they're playing to different concerns, Priti Patel and Emmanuel Macron. But Emmanuel Macron's interior minister is a pretty ugly character as well. So, yeah, I mean, we should rightfully be up in arms about what's going on in Britain, but it's not always that rosy the other side of the channel either. In terms of comparing French and British politics, I think it's always good to look beyond your own national setting, because sometimes when we're doing politics in whichever country, we're told that things have to be a certain way. You've got to be realistic, and then there's someone who's going to come and tell you what being realistic means. So, in the left under Corbyn, we're always told you couldn't, you can't, you've got to do it a certain way. So looking at another country, it helps you see how things are done a certain way, how things are done a bit differently. Does it work? Does it not work? So it helps to expand your imagination a bit. And I think imagination is very important in politics, because it's perhaps the beginning of all of our political engagements and projects is imagining a better world and then trying to work for it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, brilliant. Absolutely. I feel like I'm being enlightened already. So what has happened to this point then? So we've got to a certain stage. There is an election, but I want to go back before the election. Now, I've heard of Jean-Luc Mélenchon for a number of years now, and he's narrowly missed out on the well. Actually, I'm going to let you talk about this. I'm going to let you tell us about this. Now, Harry, you've got a couple of graphics that you want us to look at, don't you? So can you explain what the situation is at the moment? And then we'll talk a little bit in detail about some of those characters that we're talking about.
Yeah, so if Paul, are you going to open the graphics? Could we go to the very first one, which is quite simply the breakdown of the votes?
Yes, we can.
So it's worth explaining the French electoral system firstly. In the first round, there's as many candidates as will qualify, and there were 12 candidates this time. And then the top two go off to a runoff, and the runoff vote is taking place tomorrow. So on the one hand, one of the things that makes French politics exciting is that, unlike British politics, you've got lots of different candidates, lots of options on the menu. The downside is that there's no prize for coming in a close third. It's the top two who go to the runoff. So even if you miss out by a tiny bit, you don't get through. And unfortunately, for those of us on the radical left or the socialist left who listen to Socialist think tank, it was our guy who came in a very narrow third, Jean-Luc Mélenchon. I don't know, is the graphic showing, Paul?
It is, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so he came in a very frustrating third place. So on the one hand, you could say that's a failure, but it's worth thinking about the long history of this. If we look down to the bottom of the graphic, we can see lots of very small bars coloured in red and pink for Fabian Roussel, Anne Hidalgo, um, the Green candidate, slightly bigger, Yannick Jadot. So these were other left-wing candidates, and they were like the respectable left-wing mainstream. They're the Keir Starmers of this world.
I
Whereas
think
Jean-Luc Mélenchon, he's more like Jeremy Corbyn, but a sort of punk Jeremy Corbyn who can kick up a bit of a fuss in a television station. I better stop. So if Sani wanted to jump in.
no, I was just quite surprised you described Philippe Poutou and I forget her name, Nathalie Arthur as the Starmers of the left of France.
They are not Keir Starmers. They're small Trotskyist candidates, but Hidalgo and Yannick Jadot, they're the Keir Starmers of French politics. The Greens in France aren't quite as radical as the Greens in Britain. Fabien Roussel is the Communist Party. So the Communists and the Trotskyists, for some time, they've never been at very high levels. But the party that Hidalgo represents, which is the centre-left party, used to be the dominant party on the left in French politics. And from 2012 until 2017, the president of France was from this party. He was a socialist, so they'd won those elections, and they were the biggest party in France. And now what does the same party get? It gets 1.7 something percent. So the party nearly disappears. And this is very interesting because for a long time in France, exactly as we've heard our side of the channel, we were told, oh, far left, radical left, that will never work. That's out of touch with reality. The workers, the voters don't want it. It wouldn't work. It's impractical. We need to be centrist, mainstream. That's where the votes are. That's where the ideas are. And it hasn't happened. Those people who played that safe middle course, they crashed and burned. Whereas Mélenchon built on his vote score in 2017, which already built on his vote score in 2012. So it's interesting seeing that long march, that it's his third time as a candidate in the space of 10 years, building significantly in his vote share each time and having an extremely frustrating near miss. So that's the first thing to see. Maybe Stan can say what he thought about seeing it on the ground, and then we can talk about what Jean-Luc did right or not.
Well, it's speaking to some of my French comrades, some people who are in the MPA, such as Philippe Foutot's party, the new anti-capitalist party, they're almost becoming quite disenfranchised with Mélenchon. They feel he's the only candidate of leading the left charge of popular French left politics, and they seem quite surprisingly like he's sort of sucking up all the vacuum of the other French candidates, of left candidates. Like they almost suggest that it's time for him to step down as the spokesperson of the populist left in France.
Is that something to do with the system? So obviously, like Jean-Luc Mélenchon was very, very close. I'm just going to pop back to the graph again. He was very, very close to Marine Le Pen, and could have meant it was a runoff between Macron and Le Pen, I suppose, if everything was a united front. Does that not give him some sort of, like, if you were going to talk about these as left candidates, does that not give him some sort of I don't know, like moral justification for running and picking up a lot of those left votes, even if some people would think, well, he might not be the ideal left candidate, but he is the most likely left candidate and a genuine left candidate, rather than, because I'm sure Macron was in the Socialist Party, wasn't he? Wasn't he a minister in the Socialist Party?
Yeah, for sure. Mélenchon he's like a genuine leftist. He's obviously got, as Harry has said, he's run in 3 presidential elections, and each time he's got more and more votes, and he's doing very well for a far left candidate in French politics. But there's like a bit of frustration with him, and Yeah, sorry, I've lost my train of thought.
So like the other candidates, like, do they think that it's time for him to step aside and get behind another candidate, or do you think that, like, is
Well,
that what people are thinking, or is there a moral obligation to back the most popular candidate here?
from the people I've spoken to, they have this sort of frustration with him that he is, but he also is France's most left-wing candidate probably since Mitterrand, who was
More than
the
Mitterrand, I'd say. So,
he's probably the most left-wing politician president, sorry, since the 80s. He was a very successful, well, socialist president who managed to get three presidential terms under varying forms of colours.
So, like, I guess what are the other candidates thinking then? So the other people have come out. Are they devastated that their votes could have gone towards a runoff? Because is this the runoff from hell basically? Is this like the two candidates that are going for it, who picked up between them just over 50% of the votes? Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So they've picked up just over 50% of the votes, and there's a runoff now between those two, and it looks like the worst case scenario, doesn't it, for people, or is it, or could there have been a worst case scenario than this?
No, I think a repeat of 2017. Obviously, now we've on the back of Macron is no longer a new candidate. He's defending his record, and so now Marine Le Pen has got not only a modified policy platform, she's obviously moderated her policies, but also now they've got frustrations with Macron of 5 years, and so the worst case scenario this time is that she may actually win. Because although Macron is leading in the polls at the moment, there's a lot of undecided voters this time around, and I think there's a lot of concern that they will swing to Le Pen, particularly on the left.
So, look, as I said, do we know what the other candidates are feeling now at the moment? Like, are those candidates maybe regretful, or is this something like Harry?
Would you?
so I think in terms of the other candidates on the left, there was a genuine difference of views between Mélenchon and some of the candidates, notably Yannick Jadot, the Green candidate, and Anne Hidalgo, the candidate for the Socialist Party, which is a sort of like mainstream Labour equivalent, the sort of equivalent of Keir Starmer, Tony Blair, you name it. And that's what we saw in the Jeremy Corbyn period. Like, there was a real divide in Labour, and people try and present it as a concern about electability. But I think that was disingenuous. There were also like genuine disagreements of ideas and of policy, which is totally fine and legitimate, but to discuss it as such. In terms of strategic voting, I think one thing that was quite striking about Mélenchon was he didn't make his pitch, vote for me, I'm the guy with the best shot. He said, I want people to be convinced. I want people to get behind the policies. And he said that starting at a point in time when his polling was much lower, and he really had a last minute boost. And he did it sort of on the calculation that people are sort of disgusted with being told, oh, you've got to vote for this, it's the least worst. Parties doing deals together, trying to force the electorate to vote a certain way. And I seemed it worked well. I'll put my cards on the table. I'm a fan of Mélenchon, quite convinced by his strategy. Stan maybe is more skeptical, or knows people who's more skeptical. But I think that strategy of, a very back to basics form of politics, of decide what you think is right and talk to people directly, voters directly, to try and change their minds and convince them. On the one hand, it's so fundamental to what politics should be about, but we often forget it. And we often talk about things other than the policies and address voters in other terms. So I think that's something to learn from.
Yeah, I definitely think Mélenchon, he definitely knows how to talk to the French electorate, and he definitely knows how to address those concerns.
Yeah, so that's with regards to like the other left candidates. I think some of them, there's a genuine policy divide. You know, we saw it with Corbyn and the anti-Corbynites. It wasn't just a practical disagreement; they had fundamentally different worldviews. And then there's smaller left-wing ones, the Trotskyist parties, who Stan has referred to, the supporters of Philippe Poutou and Nathalie Arthaud. The big frustration for Mélenchon and his supporters has been the Communist Party, which you can see here in the bright red, supporting Fabien Roussel, which came in at just over 2%.
I think
so
it's
not
important.
A huge share of the vote, but the past two times round, they've backed Mélenchon. And if you can assume that the numbers would have added up nice and neatly, which is not how politics works, it would have pushed them over the line.
And also, it's important to note the French Communist Party is no longer really communist. They sort of abandoned the communist ideology in the 80s to switch towards what was called Euro-communism, which was this sort of democratically minded reformist version of communism, which of course has now led to today. I would say they are like the soft left of Labour. They're sort of leftists, but they're also a bit sceptical of going too far left on the basis of electability. And talking about the other candidates in the left in France, I think the one thing we have in the UK is we have the two-party system effectively. And so all the minor parties are sucked up into the factions of the Labour Party, whereas France still has that plural nature of leftist parties.
So yeah, I'd agree with that. And it was perhaps even clearer 5 years ago when the French electorate sort of really split 4 or 5 ways, with Le Pen on the far right and Fillon on the sort of equivalent of the Conservative Party centre right. And then on the other hand, Mélenchon on the radical left, Hamon supporting the remainders of the Socialist Party, and Macron as a centrist. So you had this sort of really fractured political system. And in the same year in the UK, we had the 2017 election, which was like the return of two-party politics. Over 80% of voters nationally, over 90% of voters in England voted either Labour or Conservative. And the explanation for that, exactly as Stanley has just said, that in the UK, people who would be in different political parties in France are sort of forced into the same party, that the Conservative Party gets a sort of UKIP wing and it gets a sort of business country shire Tories and sticks them together. And the Labour Party gets a sort of centrist technocrats and it gets a sort of Corbynistas and sticks them together in the same party.
Yeah, whereas with France, you have Les Républicains, Le Pen, who are effectively the British Conservatives, I would argue. And then Zemmour is the Farage now of French politics, sort of this very outspoken far-right candidate, but he's not within the two-party nature of politics, two camps of politics.
So, like, I guess, did anyone get their act together on this one? Did any particular political ideology get their act together? Is Macron attracting people who are saying, well, we want to keep Le Pen out for whatever reason? So does Macron soak up any of a left vote? Or is Macron now completely divorced? Because I don't actually know this, because, as I say, he was in the Socialist Party, which you say wasn't actually as socialist as perhaps it declared itself to be. But he was part of the Socialist Party. And does he pick up any of the left vote whatsoever? And does Le Pen pick up any of the left vote whatsoever? Because I've heard Le Pen trying to appeal to certainly working class sensibilities, certainly like she's changed her language, because I would always see her as someone who is from, she should be seen as being quite a political elitist, I guess, given that, like, you know, she's got the family background in there. Regardless of her politics, she's from a bit of a political dynasty, isn't she? Rather than being this like grassroots person, but she seems to be speaking the language of the grassroots at times. So, like, where is their support coming from?
Well, like a lot of Western countries, France has suffered, they've suffered from their elitist choices to move production abroad. There are a lot of communities in the north where Le Pen gets a lot of her support, who are post-industrial. So she gets a lot of her support from there. And of course, she's obviously very xenophobic. And so she's attached into that also xenophobic fears some French people have towards other communities in France. And then what she's changed, obviously, with this election is she has now changed her language a bit, as you have identified, activist based. And so she's now talking a lot more about the cost of living crisis, which is normally what the left talks about. So she's very much targeting sort of disenfranchised left, maybe generally older left voters. Whereas Macron is, of course, the anti-Le Pen candidate at the moment in the second round. I'm not sure if Harry agrees with that.
Yeah, I think I agree with a lot of that. Yeah, the far right with Le Pen has got strong support from poor manual working class voters. I don't know if it's the same individuals who would have once voted for the left, or it's people who, in another time, people of their demographic would have voted for the left. That's a detail that's for the sociologists to go and figure out. But yeah, I think this is a challenge for us in the UK, France, and everywhere else. Is the left, out of touch with the manual working class? Those aren't the only people who are workers. We shouldn't, get hung up on an idea that being working class only means one thing, only means a male worker in a factory. But also, if we're not engaging with those people and we're engaging with different sectors of the working class at the exclusion of others, it is something to think and work through. And it's something that's changed with the far right votes, that exactly as both of you have said, the Le Pen vote used to be much better off, much more middle class. And it sort of followed its electorate, that as it sort of attracted working class voters with xenophobic aspirations, it's also come to reflect back some redistributive economic policies, and then has picked up more votes as a result. Macron, the voting profile changed a lot in the space of 5 years, that he really picked up the old centre-left electorate 5 years ago. Teachers, well-off retirees, big cities, students. He's lost some of that as he's become more the classic right-wing vote. That if you look at the votes, you see the equivalent of the centre-right Conservatives. They've gone very low, but Macron's picked up that vote. So he's picked up the vote of old people in particular vote very heavily for Macron. So there's a sense of fear and security vote going towards him. Also well-paid public functionaries. So that vote Macron has really cornered. Finally, in terms of people who got their act together, I'm going to sound like I'm here just to sing the praises of Mélenchon, and why not? If the left has got lessons to learn, that's perhaps where we should look. It's worth emphasising that he's had a long march to get to where he is. It's his third presidential run. That could be criticised as, okay, move aside for someone else, but he does it well. And the French left was very weak when he began, the left of the left. And perhaps in Britain, we're too far the other way of thinking once someone loses an election, we chuck them in the bin and we start all over again. So if you look at the results from 2 weeks ago in France, when you see a very large vote for Mélenchon and the Socialist Party beneath 2%, you wouldn't have been able to imagine that 10 years ago. 10 years ago, so in the election before last in France, the Socialist Party was the biggest party. It went on to win. So what we're looking at is the equivalent of if in 10 years' time, the UK Labour Party fell to under 10% and a new party founded by Jeremy Corbyn or John McDonnell or someone we don't know yet gets over a fifth of the vote and is one of the biggest parties in the land.
But it's interesting you mentioned about how Macron come in and swept all these votes up back in 2017. He took policy ideas from the left and right. As you said, he was obviously from the extreme centre left,